Yasodhanandana Brajajanarandana Yasodhanandana Brajajanarandana Yamunatira Vanachadi Yamunatira Vanachadi Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Balabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Balabha Girivardhari Yasodhanandana Brajajanarandana Yasodhanandana Brajajanarandana Jamunatira Vanachadi Yamunatira Vanachadi Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivacharya Astatara Satsasi Srimad Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Gaur Premanandi Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya This morning we're going to cover 3 verses, continuing where we left off yesterday. '38, 39. '39, 40, 41. 39, 40, 41. And before we do that, a little carry over from yesterday's discussion on the topic of why Kardama Muni did what he did. Create this aerial mansion and so forth out of his mystic power. So there's texts 9 and 10 from this chapter. I'm going to read and then we'll briefly discuss. Upon hearing the speaking of her husband, who excelled in knowledge of all kinds of transcendental science, innocent Devahuti was very satisfied. Her smiling face, shining with a slightly bashful glance, she spoke in a choked voice because of great humility and love. Sri Devahuti said, text 10, "My dear husband, O best of the Brahmanas, I know that you have achieved perfection and are the master of all the infallible mystic powers because you are under the protection of Yogamaya, the transcendental nature. Since you once made a promise that our bodily union should now fulfill, since children are a great quality for a chaste woman who has a glorious husband." Text 11, Devahuti continued, "My dear Lord, I am struck by excited emotion for you. Therefore, kindly make what arrangements must be made according to the scriptures so that my skinny body, emaciated through unsatisfied passion, may be rendered fit for you. Also, my Lord, please think of a suitable house for this purpose." Text 12. Maitreya continued, "O Vidura, seeking to please his beloved wife, the sage Kardama exercised his yogic power and instantly produced an aerial mansion that could travel at his will." The verses we're going to discuss this morning is their travels, and everything in between is like a description of that facility and preparing her to enter onto that facility. So the discussion we had was, why did he willfully create this aerial mansion? On the appeal of Devahuti, her request, the purport Prabhupada explains something in relation to Ayurveda. According to Ayurveda, there's other factors, at least I've heard from Ayurveda, but depending upon the attraction of the male for union with female, then a male son will be born and vice versa. A female child will be born. There's other factors. So the purport explains, she's considering, according to Shastra, then, that in the purport Prabhupada says Kama Sutras, and in Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary, he gives the author of the Kama Sutras. There's this and that and the other thing, details described in the purport that help in the process of attracting sexual desire. If the woman does these things, it helps accentuate and excite sensual desire or sexual desire from a man, her husband or otherwise. So she's saying, the former beauty that I had is now gone because of the austerities. And the verse even specifically says, because of unfulfilled desires, passions, the beauty has subsided. And in order to now enter into this stage of our marriage where there will be children, can you please make suitable arrangements? And then the response, the verse says, and so he did. And the commentary, Vishwanath's commentary says it didn't take any time at all. You didn't have to sit down and meditate or get a contractor, or he didn't need to do anything. He just, voila, this mansion was manifest. And specifically to reciprocate with and fulfill the desire of his good wife, for the purpose of an important aspect of husband-wife relationships, in their case in particular, the service to Lord Brahma, or his service in particular, creating offspring, qualified offspring. So there's that discussion. So why did he do what he did? It was to fulfill the desire of his wife, which was also commensurate with the bigger plan of the personality of Godhead, or the desire of Lord Brahma to fill up the universe with good praja. So it was in keeping with that service to the Supreme Lord and his spiritual master and father, Lord Brahma, and she assisting in his service. Now, is this the rule or is this the exception to the rule? Well, according to if all that we look at is what's here, it's the rule. But step outside of this, it's one of the ways to analyze or understand messages from the scripture. The big picture of multiple references is mandatory. Because, so one example that's over here that says it's not necessary, because of my preparing for the Ayodhya Yatra, I've come to understand a lot of things about different personalities. And Shatananda was the minister of King Janak. King Janak is one of our 12 Mahajans. You can't get any higher than King Janak and the other 11 Mahajans as far as spiritual authority is concerned. And the minister of King Janak was Shatananda. And Shatananda was the son of Gautama and Ahalya. Shatananda, like Vishwamitra Muni, was a renowned ascetic. In fact, Shatananda, at some point, the son of Gautama and Ahalya, stayed at the ashram and studied under Vishwamitra. So he's extremely qualified person in a variety of ways. And we don't have any information that the Kama Sutra standard was followed by Gautama and Ahalya. And I'm sure there's multiple other examples of qualified sons who were born without this procedure of following Kama Sutra and having the wife, the Brahmani, or the wife of a Brahmana, or the wife of some exalted personality, fulfill these requirements so that good praja can be produced, or even particularly so that a son can be produced. All I'm saying here is, is it necessary? And the indication that I'm aware of is no. Then why was it done if it's not necessary? Well, it's part of the Lord's plan, and he's following the indication of the Lord, of Lord Vishnu, and part of Lord Vishnu's plan was to have the pastime like this, and here we have the commentary in the Bhagavatam that tells us, we're not Devahuti and Kardama, but for those who are in household life, there are considerations, if not, considerations for those who wish to be bearers of exalted children. Some considerations from the side, specifically here, the side of the wife, of how to decorate herself. The purport explains various ointments and fragrances and ornaments of decoration and nice clothing and so forth. Like Prabhupada would explain sometimes, along the lines of the duty of the wife, one of the duties of the wife is to see that the atmosphere in the home is pleasant and clean, and the wife, when the husband returns from work, she's decorated properly and is cheerful and pleasing words, because the hard day in the battlefield of the workplace, it helps the husband feel peaceful coming back to the nest, to the home, and it's part of the social obligation or social duty of wife to do those things. It helps the whole dynamic of good relation in the husband-wife dynamic within the home, so that it's a place of spiritual culture. So even on the material side, it helps. So back to the text that we're covering. This was done by Kardama. We'll assume that by the Supersoul's inspiration or indication, prompted by the words of Devahuti, please, he could have said, well, that's not necessary. The Vishwanath's commentary says, interesting, he says, just go back into our leaf hut and do what's needed, quote unquote. Then Vishwanath says no. No, because the reasons mentioned, that the desire to have qualified sons, and therefore this other procedure was followed. Kardama had that capacity. Kardama, under the indication of Yogamaya, the internal potency, he made that arrangement effortlessly. Okay, so now we're going to go to text 39, because yesterday we heard Devahuti entered into the lake as indicated by her husband. When she came out of the lake, there were 1,000 Gandharva assistant ladies attending to her and decorating her and beautifying her and so forth and so on, and her prior and original and natural beauty was fully restored, and Kardama seemed, though seemingly attached to his beloved consort, while served by the Gandharva girls, the sage did not lose his glory, which was mastery over his self. In the aerial mansion, Kardamuni, with his consort, shone as charmingly as the moon in the midst of the stars in the sky, which causes rows of lilies to open in ponds at night. That was yesterday's verse. So text 39. In that aerial mansion, he traveled to the pleasure valleys of Mount Meru, which were rendered all the more beautiful by cool, gentle, fragrant breezes that stimulated passion. In these valleys, the treasure of the gods, Kuvera, surrounded by beautiful women and praised by the siddhas, generally enjoys pleasure. Kardama Muni also, surrounded by the beautiful damsels and his wife, went there and enjoyed for many, many years. Purport. Kuvera is one of the 8 demigods who are in charge of different directions of the universe. It is said that Indra is in charge of the eastern side of the universe, where the heavenly planet or paradise is situated. Similarly, Agni is in charge of the southeastern portion of the universe. Yama, the demigod who punishes sinners, is in charge of the southern portion. Nirriti is in charge of the southwest part of the universe. Varuna, the demigod in charge of the waters, is in charge of the western portion. Vayu, who controls the air and who has wings to travel in the air, is in charge of the northwestern part of the universe. And Kuvera, the treasure of the demigods, is in charge of the northern part of the universe. All these demigods take pleasure in the valleys of Mount Meru, which is situated somewhere between the sun and the earth. Don't ask me to explain any of this. You can ask, but the answer is I don't know. In the aerial mansion, Kardama Muni traveled throughout the 8 directions controlled by the different demigods described above, and as the demigods go to Mount Meru, he also went there to enjoy life. When one is surrounded by young, beautiful girls, sex stimulation naturally becomes prominent. Kardama Muni was sexually stimulated, and he enjoyed his wife for many, many years in that part of Mount Meru. But his sex indulgence was praised by many, many siddhas, beings who have attained perfection, because it was intended to produce good progeny for the good of universal affairs. Text 40. Satisfied by his wife, he enjoyed in that aerial mansion not only on Mount Meru, but in different gardens known as Vaishrambaka, Surasana, Nandana, Pushpa Bhadraka, Chaitra Rathya, and by the Manasa Sarovara lake. Final, text 41. He traveled in that way through the various planets as air passes uncontrolled in every direction. Coursing through the air in that great and splendid aerial mansion, which could fly at his will, he surpassed even the demigods. Purport. The planets occupied by the demigods are restricted to their own orbits, but Kardama Muni, by his yogic power, could travel all over the different directions of the universe without restriction. The living entities who are within the universe are called conditioned souls. That is, they are not free to move everywhere. We are inhabitants of this earthly globe. We cannot move freely to other planets. In this modern age, man is trying to go to other planets, but so far he has been unsuccessful. It is not possible to travel to any other planets because, by the laws of nature, even the demigods cannot move from one planet to another. But Kardama Muni, by his yogic power, could surpass the strength of the demigods and travel in space in all directions. The comparison here is very suitable. The words yatha, anila, indicate that as the air is free to move anywhere without restriction, so Kardamoni unrestrictedly traveled in all directions of the universe. Has anybody seen Mount Meru? Somewhere between the earth and the sun. Something quite mystical. Higher dimensional space. Something that we can't see because it's so refined. It's a mystery. I'm sure there's an answer to the mystery, but to me it remains a mystery. It's not fanciful, it's not fiction. Why would it be in the Bhagavatam if it was like that? So it's part of the structure of the universe, and personalities qualified like Kardamoni have that capacity to move freely. Narada has his veena and plays on his veena, and he goes wherever he likes, not only in this universe, but into the spiritual realm freely. Doesn't have a material body, at least as far as I understand it. When he left his body in his previous life, he achieved a spiritual form, and in any case, he has the freedom to move anywhere. And at least within this universe, we're hearing Kardama similarly have that capacity, and he had the capacity given to him by the personality of God, the master of mystic powers, Yogeshwara. And so he conferred upon Kardama this capacity to create and to travel. Now, let's just touch on this. Was Kardama Muni sexually agitated, as in material sexually agitated? Certainly it's directly stated here. The answer, one answer is yes. Kardama Muni was sexually stimulated, and he enjoyed his wife many, many years in that part of Mount Meru, but his sex indulgence was praised by many siddhas, beings who have attained perfection, because it was intended to produce good progeny for the good of universal affairs. Now, he's a perfected being, and the siddhas are perfected beings. And we can say, similarly, Arjuna, he's not a conditioned soul. He's one of Krishna's eternal associates. He's a perfected being. And it's not that he became perfected, he's perfected. So in order to, Prabhupada expresses this, in order to incite Arjuna to anger, he spoke Bhagavad Gita. Because without anger, how can you fight? And in this case, the fighting is not just play, it's the other party is killed. So in order to carry out something like that, there has to be passion. There has to be anger, the younger brother of passion. Has to be. So we can blame Krishna wrongly for inciting Arjuna to anger and to kill. And we can blame Arjuna wrongly for having anger and passion and killing, carrying out that kind of duty. Probably it's no surprise, but it may be a surprise, that Gandhi, the passive, non-violent, civil disobedience sadhu, wrote commentary on Bhagavad Gita where he declares that if my, this is the scholar of Bhagavad Gita, if my being a Hindu is dependent upon accepting that the Kurukshetra battle actually took place and that Krishna incited Arjuna to take up the battle, then I quit. I reject my Hinduism. And my understanding of Bhagavad Gita is da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. It was explicitly in other places. He was a Mayavadi. Krishna has no form. There's no such entity as the Satchitananda Vigraha Krishna. Rather, Krishna means something, 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 something. This is the scholar of Bhagavad Gita. Our teaching is Arjuna was incited by Krishna's words to fight. Why? Because there was service needed, and the service needed was protection, and for protection, then he needed, you use this language, he needed to engage the mode of passion as opposed to being engaged by the mode of passion. He had to engage that kind of energy in order to carry out his service to Krishna. And that's the position of Arjuna, or a transcendentalist. At least that's one perspective to consider. Arjuna. Now let's go to Krishna. Krishna also, different demons in Vrindavan, and out of Vrindavan he killed. So was Krishna engaging the mode of passion? Like we were just described Arjuna, he was engaging that aspect of the material energy in order to be victorious in the Kurukshetra battle. And Krishna wanted him to do that. So does Krishna do that too? Krishna doesn't, for sure. Krishna is not influenced by the modes of nature. He's the controller of the modes of nature. When Krishna appears, he appears in a spiritual form that's not a temporary material form. There's no modes of nature and no prakriti that touch Krishna, although it's his potency. So now, what's it like when somebody like Arjuna, fully engaged by the internal potency, acts to exhibit anger? You know, like we hear descriptions, his copper red eyes, when he came to know that Ashvatthama had killed the 5 sleeping sons of Draupadi. He was angry. Or, you know, the whole of Ramayana, the battle against Ravana and the kidnapping of Sita. There was from the part of the participants, they were in service to Ram, but there was anger. So how do we understand that? Krishna exhibits his transcendental feature, but it's not the worldly feature of anger. It's not a mundane feature of passion that Krishna married 16,108 queens, and then produced children with those queens, or dancing with the gopis in rasa dance. There's no passion. There's no touch of the modes of nature from Krishna's side. So how does it work with, here, back to Kardama Muni, seemingly, because it goes back and forth between he was moved and then it was seemingly moved. So he's not one of us. He's going to become the father of the personality of Godhead while living in the forest. Lord Vishnu came. In short, he's not one of us. He's beyond the influence of karma and guna. He's a perfectly situated person. And we're hearing the statement, he's agitated by sex desire. Or as Arjuna is agitated by anger in order to fight, because prior to that he's not ready, not agitated by anger to fight. Although there's plenty of reason, scriptural and otherwise. How do we understand Kardama Muni's activity? And then next is bring it down to our own activity. These are instructions in relation to household life, but they're also instructions in relation to life. How do we do activities that look like they're in the modes of nature? Like, distributing books. Looks like Vaishya activity. How do we not get into the mood of, and the mode of nature of a Vaishya while doing transcendental activity? Or, go to work. How do we go to work or go to school? How do we do things that are of this world and not be influenced by the modes of nature? Well, we will be influenced by the modes of nature unless there's 100% unmixed connection with the personality of Godhead, like Kardama Muni. So we're not there, but we perform a prescribed duty with the sense that Krishna's protection by the mood of being in his service won't touch us, won't contaminate us. We can cultivate that at least through proper practice of sadhana bhakti and then dedicating our activity to Krishna's service. Madarpanam, offering to Krishna that activity and the results of the activity. That's a linking process of bhakti. That's how we practice it. And is it possible to become completely free from the modes of nature while engaging with material nature? Yes. What about this one, Kardama Muni, and his involvement with this Vimana and the ladies and Kuvera and so forth? He wasn't on the level of Kuvera. He was beyond the level of Kuvera or any demigod, for that matter. Yet, there's multiple verses covering this. So it's important for us to try our best to consider what's the message that the Bhagavatam wants to convey, and how does it apply to us. Kardama, my understanding is this: Kardama was engaging that aspect of Krishna's energy for the purpose of serving Krishna, and therefore he wasn't affected like a worldly person is affected, any more than Arjuna was affected by the anger and controlled by anger. He was engaging in a service for Krishna that required anger, and so he accepted it by Krishna's indication to do so. But he wasn't controlled by it, he's controlled by the internal potency. In service to Krishna. And similarly, Kardama is in service to Lord Vishnu, and not otherwise. That's his purity, and not otherwise. So we're in the position of mix. We should not imitate such qualified souls, but we can understand, but in principle, when that dedication to the personality of Godhead service is there, cent percent, or to the degree that it's there, the modes of nature will not touch us, although we may be engaging the material energy in a required way. So for us it's a cultivation, and here's the standard of perfection. Interesting subject. Any questions on this? Discussion? Your service this morning. No? Yes?
Just appreciating this class very much, Guru Maharaj. Appreciating the class very much. Especially getting clear that how to act in the world, and also try to get not try to come to the stage of freeing from the modes. It's very, very flow was very touching to me.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Everyone's clear, huh? Or processing, maybe.
During the class, my thoughts just kind of went to just certain services we do at an institutional level, like management, stuff like that. It really seems very easy to get influenced by the mode of passion because we have to get things done. And then the other stuff manifests from that mode. And although the initial desire is not that, but so many times we see that something happens after a while. To sometimes the persons who were nicely fixed, but then taking on some position, something happens. Or, we can talk about it at that level, or even just on an individual level, that it seems like, at least that's not the explicit intention, but the action of the modes is subtle, and one doesn't realize when one gets into that space. And I guess for a person who is constantly keeping that with sadhana and reflecting each day that can be prevented or addressed, not only internally within the heart, but in external situations. But sometimes when just like on this role and even something is brought to our attention, there just seems to be no space perhaps to look within, like, and maybe like the whole thing just gets dismissed as the other person's issue or something like that. I mean, these are just like thoughts I was having, and
Well,
you wanted to respond.
I shared with you Bhakti-Vigyan Maharaj's presentation on this topic, specifically for leaders, and the risk of those that are in a leadership position that unavoidably, even one may be making best efforts to avoid, unavoidably, by our actions, people will become hurt. And then there's consequences for that, even if it's unintentional. That is, persons feel offended, or persons are offended, or both, and then anarthas arise in the heart as a result. And then, the good-intentioned person who takes up a leadership, he's speaking to leaders. He's speaking to candidates in the GBC college to become zonal supervisor people. And in the audience are persons who have served for 20, 30 years. And hearing this, it's, wow. What you're saying makes complete sense, and therefore, who knows how much clutter behind me, unintentionally, has been created, and persons who have been hurt on the one hand, and then contaminations in my own heart on the other hand. And so it's not a small matter. One simple solution is don't do anything, but that's not a solution. Then you do something, and there's going to be somebody that's going to be hurt. It's unavoidable. It's like walking across the room, or walking across the lawn, or breathing, or just existing. Other living entities are impacted. Therefore, the necessity to be strive in. If one is going to take a responsibility, then be accountable and strive always for improvement. This was part of his message to these nice leaders. It's not targeted towards any individual. It's just the nature of the service of being a leader is what he mentioned, what you mentioned. Persons will feel, or actually be, or combination, offended or hurt. Not by intention, but unintentionally. And then what to do about that? Well, as we discussed, last week, there's introspection can help. It's not can help. It's mandatory that anyone in any service is introspective, and now specifically we're speaking of leaders. It's mandatory to be introspective and recognize, in principle, this is going on. Now, what to do about it? You can't just quit or not do. So that's not an option. And introspection is certainly an option. And then, even with the unintentional part, there are blind spots where, because the nature of trying to get something done is you're moving. And because you're moving, you can't, what do? You can't pause perpetually. You stop and a phrase that I like is, you have peripheral vision, or like the situation, the classic one of Canto 1, Chapter 7, where Arjuna is in this perplexed situation to kill Ashvatthama, to not kill Ashvatthama. And so, what to do? And the peripheral vision message is, you look beyond one who's in that role of executing something because it's to be executed. Who's going to be impacted? This is an introspection question, or seeking indication from Supersoul. And in the case of Ashvatthama, Draupadi indicated, not directly, explicitly, but Kripi is the one that's going to suffer. And is there some way that what is being asked by Krishna to do, that Kripi doesn't have to suffer? Who's going to be, when I do something, who's going to be impacted? Who's going to be hurt? How do I do what needs to be done in such a way, as far as possible, at least the thoughtfulness is there, I'm reducing the impact, on the negative impact on the lives of others. That's a peripheral vision, or that's the sign of maturity. And because I've been reading Ramayana, there's this lot of glorification about Dasarath. Dasarath was so powerful. His name tells. When he fought on the battlefield, there was like 10 Dasaraths with 10 chariots, and the people on the battlefield couldn't even tell where, how many Dasaraths, although he's one person. It was mystical. He was so capable that, of course, it sometimes happened with others. The demigods requested his participation in battle because he was so capable. There's this one, it's not from Valmiki Ramayana, but one tale or narration about Dasarath's prowess. Ravana was the conqueror of the three worlds, and he was in Lanka, so he recognized the power of Dasarath, so he sent his servants, his kinkaras, to go and tell Dasarath he should pay tribute to Ravana. So Dasarath laughed. Dasarath took his bow, fired 3 arrows, and said, when you get back to Lanka, there's a gate that is now impenetrable, and forever it can't be entered because those 3 arrows have crossed the gate. There's a gate you will never be able to enter. You'll be able to enter Lanka, but not through those gates. You'll see when you get back. Deliver that message to Ravana. So, as powerful as he was, there's many other descriptions of how refined and cultured he was, having the capacity, such capacity, being very, very very careful and refined in how he spoke. We don't have that culture. I mean, a specific example is Ram, when he won the hand of Sita breaking the bow, Janak said to Ram, please accept my daughter as your wife. And Ram's answer is, it's not for me to decide, and it's not for you to decide, it's for my father to decide. If my father comes and says I should marry, then I'll marry, and otherwise no. Later, Sita informs Anasuya, I think, that my love for Ram is resting upon such characteristics. Very refined. So when Dasarath came, and then Janak made the request of Dasarath, please accept my daughter as the wife of your son. His reply was so refined. His reply was, I am the receiver and you're the giver. Just refined, that so that I can continue my line of progeny. You are supplying such a qualified wife for my son, so that the line of progeny can be continued. Therefore, since I am the receiver and you're the giver, I must accept whatever it is that your magnanimity offers. And for these reasons, the description goes, for these reasons, Ram chose Dasarath as his father. The relationship with the personality of Godhead, the empowerment of the personality of Godhead to be a leader or a manager or anybody that does anything, a teacher, a parent, to do anything. Are we taking responsibility? It's not just getting things done. It's the way in which things get done. Pleasing to Krishna ways that, and we need lots of refinement. So that refinement is our introspection and the feedback from others, and that we require training and education. So if we're going to have a Hare Krishna temple, we have a Hare Krishna temple. It's this development of character at all levels, and certainly at the top levels. We're given an opportunity. Prabhupada was very liberal. He gave opportunities to devotees to do all kinds of things when they weren't qualified, to give them the opportunity. And he gave training to some direct, and he instructed them to give training to others, but it was certainly something that he wanted. And when mistakes are made and people become hurt, we're responsible between us and Krishna. So it's incumbent upon us move forward and refine and receive whatever resources are available to us at any level. So we're speaking leaders, but it's at any level of service, to do it in such a way that we're not making offenses against others unintentionally, and we're pleasing Krishna. And otherwise, the bhakti process is the razor's edge that's going to draw blood. So we don't stay away from the bhakti process. We need to be very conscious and careful. And if there's unintentional mistakes, that can be forgiven, but we don't repeat them. And we're open for introspection and feedback constantly. Prabhupada made those comments about GBC. The starting of your point was institutional, organizational structures. And we're bringing people together, and there's responsibility to bring them together in such a way that they do the elevation part more than the getting implicated in offending others part, unintentionally. There's gravity, there's levity and joy, and there's also gravity. And one, the second doesn't neutralize the first one. a big topic. Yes. Button.
So like, as you said, Prabhupada, when devotees were very young, they took up responsibilities and he wanted them to do certain services. I've been, for some time reflecting on this, like a balanced question of, there are certain individuals who are very capable, they can, do a lot, they have certain gifts, they have certain skills, and yet they may be very new, and perhaps they're not very also submissive at some level sometimes, or independent-minded, and yet sometimes there's a need for some service and they're engaged. And it always seems like, like tricky. Or even when there's not need for service, like how do we balance this whole thing of engaging people according to their propensities and simultaneously making sure that they will continue to grow and not get swept away by the fruits that come from that that particular service or something, because that's also there within the nature or something like that. I hope I'm making sense.
Yeah, well, this is, I'm sure that this topic was discussed again and again and again in different levels in this GBC college. Premananda? Yeah. I mean, the balance question. Empowering and then on the other side, refining. So, different persons will say different, may very well have a different response to the question, the how to balance question. My thought is, Prabhupada was bold, and using the phrase that some people like to use, he was entrepreneurial, and he was incredibly empowering. At the same time, he was incredibly powerful. He had the capacity, spiritual power, to keep things on course and to correct persons, and persons would largely accept that correction, at least externally, and he could grow their Krishna consciousness as they were taking on services according to their propensity. However, we don't have that capacity. It's something similar to the rules of sannyas. When Prabhupada was present, very liberally persons were given sannyas as an opportunity. And now there's all this refinement, procedure, and evaluation, and because we don't have that capacity, and now it's a more mature stage. Prabhupada was in his elder age, not knowing how long he would live. And so it was kind of an emergency situation. Now it's not an emergency situation, and we don't have the capacity that Prabhupada had. And so my response on the how to balance question is a realistic evaluation of our capacity to bring someone that has a propensity to a higher stage of Krishna consciousness by our association, or individually or collectively, not just for the sake of getting things done because Prabhupada did it. We want to, so the balance is I would say, recognizing our own capacity to bring persons that have a propensity to the right position. And that means evaluating the other person's capacity to come to the right, willingness to come to the right position. Yeah.
Putting this right. Sometimes persons may not be willing to receive that type of physical training or introspection.
Right.
All that, and yet they have this desire to do service and they really want to do that.
This is the balance question. You're just giving, a portrayal of one of the balance questions. Then, what to do? What's the punchline of the question?
We are not in any position to even spiritual training. We cannot give it to someone unless they are willing to receive.
That's right.
So it is essential that everybody receives spiritual training, and whether it is a leader or a follower, no matter who it is, everybody needs to prosper. These are all necessary things in spiritual life. And yet we cannot dictate that to anybody. And so
I understand the problem. So
Yeah.
what's the question?
So we have to continue doing what we are doing at the same time. We cannot stop anywhere. We have to do it.
So what's your question?
So how do you make someone do think and act in a proper way? If somebody is not even in that frame of mind to receive that, no, they are.
Okay, what to do in that circumstance is your question. It depends. It's the balance question, and I'll repeat a principle, and that is evaluating the willingness and evaluating our capacity. And if the evaluation of the willingness is weak, then as a decision, those who are decision makers need to evaluate either individually or collectively, recognizing that the unwillingness to receive that training, or whatever circumstances of their life it's not conducive. Then what's the best way to give service to this person? So it may be, something that's limited, that's, beyond what they think they can do, and even what they are able to do, depending upon how it might negatively impact, the overall picture. Because we want the overall picture, we want the garden of Krishna consciousness, not the garden of getting things done because we're engaging people according to the propensity. I mean, a lot of it has to do with the balance question, has to do with the capacity and the Krishna consciousness of the leader. What do we want over a period of years? What do we want? And decisions can be made based upon that vision. And what do we want? We want to get stuff done and a lot of people bumping into each other. Then you go in a certain direction. You just empower people and they bump into each other because they're not prepared to get training, and you just accept the consequence of it. Or you draw the narrower picture, or you find other ways that this person can become purified and engage according to their propensity, but it's going to minimally impact others while you're monitoring. So depending. upon, and I know of those, there's dozens more, but of those directional kinds of things, I'm more cautious about engaging people according to propensity when it's really clear that they're not willing to accept responsibility or training, other than giving them something to do that's way over there. Someone that's independent-minded is not a problem, provided there's a channel that's open that they can take correction, they can take direction, they can move as long as they're given some, boundary that suits their independent nature to move in. And then that independent nature that they move in also has sufficient culture that they don't step on people. If they step on people, then they may have propensity. We don't engage them in that way, according to propensity. Because depending upon, the atmosphere that we want to create. There's another way to describe this, and it's similar, but it's another way to describe. There's concentric circles out. And so they can do something that's out there, that connects them to Krishna's service, but not here. As ISKCON goes forward in time, then there's going to be concentric, like other organizations. They're affiliated entities that are not of the same standard or caliber, but they're Krishna devotees. They're doing something that's out there, and it's, there's some boundary, some definition. And whatever. That's going to take, as an organization, it's going to take some maturing, and it's also going to take the necessity of being clear. What did our founder Acharya want our organization to be? He wanted us to be inclusive, but he also wanted purity. And so, what does that look like? So it's going to take a lot of work from a lot of people to draw those boundaries. And so I'm just indicating there's another option, something that's engaging in Krishna's service out there. Devotees of Krishna, but they're not part of this core entity. And the core entity we want to disinfect, and therefore it needs the purity factor. It needs to be pretty strong, so that it can do that for society at large. That's purpose number one, to check the imbalance of values. So that's where the concentration of training and education goes over here. And then those persons that don't want, various indications they don't want, then there's not part of the core, in principle, because it's not what our founder Acharya wanted. So, but they have to have a place, and we, have to, as leaders, think of what's the proper place. But we don't just engage them because we're supposed to be compassionate and engage everybody that doesn't want, number one, the imbalance of values. They want to get stuff done and leave me alone. Okay, thank you very much, Prabhupada.